Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared. We're grateful to have you on with us. We're hopefully that you're safe wherever you're listening. And we're excited to share with you today another how to prepare in our stream of how to prepares. So this one, we're going to talk about how to prepare for an EMP or some kind of electric grid down event, whether that's an EMP or a coronal mass ejection. So before we do that, though, we want to make sure that you remember that this episode is brought to you by our good friends at AMP3. They are a first aid kit provider. They are American-made, American-owned, and American manufactured, and they are some of our good friends. They are actually really good friends. The owner is really good friends with Scott, and they have a great relationship. They give us a good deal for our listeners. If you go to amp-3.net and enter the code PrepperTalk, you will get 15% off on their first aid kits. They got some great options there. So make sure that you go through and look and find the one that's right for you and get a good first aid kit for you. You're going to need one you probably need more than one, honestly. Also, our good friends at Survival Frog are doing great over there. They are running they run specials all the time, and our code stacks with their specials. So be alert, be aware of survivalfrog.com. Go there and check out what they have to offer. And I know that they have some really good survival things, battery backups. I mean, if an EMP happens and it's destroyed, it won't do much good. But if an EMP happens and you've got it protected, and you can then you can use it to bring it back. So Survival Frog does have some solar protections and solar things there as well. So check those out. Use code PrepperTalk and get 10% off when you do that at Survival Frog. So guys, are you guys excited? Scott, Shane, and I today. We're all excited to be on the show. You guys excited
always
about to be here?
Always happy to be here. I am in distress. I'm distraught. I don't want to be. No, I'm just kidding. I do want to be here.
Maybe it's the effects of a solar flare or something that's wreaking havoc with your immune system.
It's funny because like I've always been in prepping. Like that's always been. I just thought that was normal life. I was born that way because the multiple generations before me all lived a preparedness lifestyle. Like that's just. I thought my grandpa's concrete storage room was just a concrete storage room, and I found out later that it had a steel door on it, and that's his bunker because he's a World War II veteran and was like, I'm worried about this, let's build this bunker. Okay, cool. But like EMPs was one of those things never on my radar as a kid. Never, like we're always worried about an invasion, we're always worried about natural disasters. I shouldn't say worried. Those are the talking points, right? Mostly the natural disasters. My family lived near Teton when the Teton Dam, Teton Dam up in Idaho broke. Devastating. But like EMP, what's an EMP? What's solar flare? What are we going to worry about those? And then as I started learning about it, I'm like, oh crap, that's game changer. I think the one of the largest scale game changers there is. And so that got me panicky for a little while years ago until I started doing more research and started getting better prepared. And so I'm hoping that this episode and a lot of those conversations actually were with Shane. Shane and I talked about it a lot because that was one of my concerns. And he's like, oh, we could do this and that and this and that. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's a good idea. What about this? So we're going to dive into that today. We're going to kind of explain what it is, explain why it's important to know what to do, but also how to be more resilient before, be prepared for it, have a plan through it, and what to do after it. That's the goal of today's conversation. So stick with us, take notes, have fun, join in on our conversation after the fact. You can comment, light it up on our YouTube, comment and line it up in our private groups over at Facebook and our soon to launch World of Prep. You can go find out more about that in a couple of days. We're going to do an email to notify you guys when that launches and opens up. So so an EMP, an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. I've seen, it's been funny. I've had conversations like, I'm really worried about an EMP. It's an acronym, so it's not a word. It's EMP.
That's so funny.
It can be caused by a nuclear missile be launched high up in the atmosphere. It can be caused by a lightning strike. Lightning strike can have EMP effects. It can be caused by an actual detonation device designed specifically to trigger and be an EMP. So depending on where it is and how large that trigger is, it can have a larger or smaller effect. It can completely wipe out the nation if it's placed in the right places, or it can be, you can be completely unfazed and unbothered by it, right? The problem we have is we have a huge electrical grid that really is 3 system relays that are all connected. And I'm probably using the wrong terminology.
And it's not strengthened either, right?
Yeah, no fortifications
Hardened.
since the 60s.
Yeah.
Hardened, sorry.
Yeah. Well, and no major updates to systems either. So it is extremely fragile.
I was listening to a guy, or maybe it was you guys telling the story of somebody you guys talked to, that the electric, just the grid itself, because of all the wires and the infrastructure, to rewire it would take a year to 2 years.
Well, there are a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things that can be done to harden our, and the most vulnerable part of our entire system is the grid itself.
Mm-hmm.
The like you say, Parasol, all the wires that are out there hanging like a big antenna, the actual grid of all the electrical cables crossing the country. It's like a big antenna, and it's like a big collection dish. And obviously going back to the Carrington event, was a very strong CME, a solar flare from the sun, obviously, and even back then, they just had very little copper wiring from the telegraph stations. There's a word,
the old telegraph,
where they transmit Morse code, and that collected enough of that from that very small array of wires to catch things on fire. And they didn't have sensitive electronics back then, so even more now, how vulnerable we are, our grid is in particular, to whether it's an EMP from a missile, a nuclear explosion, or a CME from the sun. I'm not terribly concerned about it, but we can talk more about that.
Well, I was thinking too, with everything being so electrical now and on the Internet of Things, I would say that another big worry might be some kind of cyber attack. I know that's already, Klaus Schwab has said the next big thing is we are preparing for a cyber attack. Mr. evil villain himself. That could be legit as far as I'm concerned, because they can run a virus or some kind of code through the computer systems that run the grid, and to cause a problem there too. So there's just so many. There's just one more thing I should say to watch out for as to what could cause an EMP.
Yeah, and if you think about it, we all live on life support. Without the grid, we go back to the primitive times, and I really like that word, primitive. But can we survive without the grid? Most people can't. Most people need, and I do too. Obviously, I would go back to the Stone Age without the grid. So we're all on living on a form of life support. But there are some really simple things that we can do to harden our own homes, our preps that we've already set aside for these type of emergencies. And honestly, I definitely don't want to put any fear out there, because I'm not very concerned about this possibility of a big solar flare, at least not right now, not for the foreseeable future for me. I mean, that's my personal opinion. But I am prepared. I have taken the steps. There are some other things I need to do that we can talk about, how to better harden my home and my bug out location, and the devices that I have that will be my life support after the grid goes down. Because I think at some point, and I think like you mentioned, Paris, I think it's more likely that there's a cyber attack event that will take our grid down. I think that's more likely than an EMP or solar, but definitely need to be prepared for all of them.
Yeah, we never know what's going to happen nowadays. I mean, we just had at the power station, not what was it, a couple months ago, Shane? We had it was in Utah County, and there was an explosion at one of the power plants, and it took out pretty much half the county. And I was like,
oh, down in your neck of the woods, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I texted you. I'm like, hey, did it affect you? Because there were some people, there were some patches that were big. Out.
Yeah,
and so it's kind of wild that any little thing can happen to cause something like that. So
yeah, absolutely. It's there are, and we can get into what we can do to prepare from those things, or really kind of talk about really what else we should be watchful for, because that's obviously the one reason we bring this up. One of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this topic is that if you are aware, then you can be prepared. If you're not talking about it and don't know the facts, not that saying that I have all the facts or I know exactly what to do, but I think I've got a pretty clear picture. There's quite an array of speculation, wild speculation, from the extreme to the mild, of what will actually happen during an EMP, whether it's from the sun or from a nuclear explosion. And so I think, we could dispel some of those myths. We could talk about really realistically what would likely happen to our vehicles, to our electronics, to the grid, and the simple little things we can do to protect ourselves from that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I'm always saying, look to the past to prepare for the future, right? That's my main mantra. So I base a lot of my preparedness around not needing the grid, right? Not needing electricity. So my electrical needs, my power needs in an emergency are minimal. I don't necessarily need those things to survive per se. Like where we live up on the hill, our water has to be pumped up to the water tanks, and that takes electricity, right? From there, it's gravity fed from the water tanks, and so on and so forth. Pump stations for sewer and so forth all require electricity. And so part of my plans are to move away from here, to get away from that, or I have my own systems that are that I control myself essentially. And but being here in town is where I am at most of the time. So if it's a CME, we're going to have some notice. A couple of days that the sun is monitored, it's watched from a lot of different equipment and cameras and so forth, and so typically there's a couple of day warning that would allow us to be able to take those sensitive electronics and put them in Faraday bags, and or even have time to create your own Faraday cages and so forth. And there's a lot of resources online where you can search how to make your own Faraday cage, or you may even have time to get on Amazon and order some Faraday bags. But I would suggest you do that beforehand.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And so have some Faraday bags, and some of the Faraday bags I've tested them, and essentially they have to be double bagged for it to work properly, where I'm not getting a signal from say a phone in a Faraday bag. In one bag I'm still getting one signal, in two bags I'm getting no signal. So that's a simple way to test if your Faraday cage or Faraday bag is working. So I think
if you call the phone, right, you can put your phone in there, and
right.
if you call the phone and it doesn't ring, then the Faraday thing is working.
Correct. Or
if it does
have
ring,
an AM/FM radio, a hand radio, put it in the bag. If you don't hear any sound, any signal, other than maybe static, then yeah, it's also working that as well. So that's a couple different ways you can test your Faraday cage.
So let's say in my house, and do I want to put something in the walls and build a whole room, or am I just like, hey, you know what? I have a generator. I want to get a Faraday bag big enough to fit my generator in so that my generator is protected. So am I protecting things, or do I want to protect the whole room? I mean, I remember in the book, Going Home, the guy met up with some dude who had a full-blown Faraday room. Like he was in the, like he took off the sheetrock and he threw chicken wire up in there all the way around.
Yeah.
And
I think that's mainly to keep out particular signals. I have heard that will work for as a Faraday cage to protect electronics. But typically a Faraday bag or Faraday cage is going to be a solid metal, but insulated on the inside to create an entire shield. I believe, depending on the intensity of the the CME, of the the EMP, would require different levels of protection, from mild to wild, you could say. So for that question, I don't think it's necessary to protect an entire room. If you want to, and that's an easy way probably to protect your electronics, you just got to make sure you get all your electronics into that room before the EMP hits there. And if it's an intercontinental ballistic missile, you've got 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes notice, if we get that notice. So maybe you have 10 minutes notice at the time, which should be enough to get a lot of your electronics into Faraday bags and so forth. But
so you just got to buy a big enough bag to put whatever you want to protect into it.
Multiple bags or so forth. Like when you say generators, I would only worry about a solar generator. I wouldn't worry about a gas generator.
Okay.
Right. Gas generator is be carbureted. If it had electronic fuel injection, then, like your vehicles, there might be some possibility for damage. Although vehicles are somewhat shielded because of their metal body and so forth, and so it is questionable, and depending on how close you are to the event is what may happen to your vehicle. It's permanent or temporary damage or something easy to fix. And there are that EMP shield, right? That's arguable that works. I don't know for sure, but there are some tests that suggest that the EMP shield type devices that will arrest, like a lightning arrestor. You can put a lightning arrestor on your home, on anything it's you're concerned about, and tests have shown that will arrest. Of course, lightning can put off a mild EMP, but there are tests that show that will work. But I don't think anybody really knows in the end what actually will work until you experience it yourself. So what do? Do you put your whole house, wrap your whole house in copper, like you say, put a copper wire cage around your whole house or room? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't personally worry about vehicles. I'm not worried about vehicles. I do have a carbureted motorcycle. That's the extent of my preps for mobility. Is a carbureted motorcycle that won't have nothing will hurt it that way, and I'm not too worried about vehicles. And I think that's mainly because where we live, we're not direct targets, I guess, necessarily. We have some military bases around here that will be targets, but I think wrapping your whole room is excessive.
Well,
although it'd be nice, but
yeah, I like the idea of just taking one of your laptops, take an older one, copy all the data, all the important things onto that one, and put that in a Faraday bag or cage and leave it there. And every once in a while, you pull it out and copy over any updated documents. Oh, we changed insurance. Cool. Put a new insurance packet in there. Boom. Oh, we changed life insurance. We changed. I got married. I want my marriage license in there. I want just critical documents, critical backup stuff. Put it in there. You want to keep all your old movies and digital photos and everything and videos. You just open up your little Faraday bag over here and you get a hard drive. You can get as many hard drives as you want, and you can just leave the other stuff in there. And a lot of safes are actually hardened enough that they are EMP safe, gun safes. So good steel metal safe. You could build your own little one as well, or you can go on Amazon or search Google and find a bunch of EMP protective Faraday bags. But I've got a backup laptop, and I've got a couple of hard drives, and if we need to, we add stuff to the other hard drive, drop it in there when we want to. It's coming great for backups. I made the mistake of not backing up my prior laptop, and it took me forever to get all the data back.
Dang.
So just for that reason alone, I'm more concerned about doing backups, not just to a cloud, but to my hard drives at least once a year, probably twice a year is what I'm going to do from now on. When I do my bag checks in April and October, I'll probably double check my download, move everything to the new terabyte drive, and drop that into my Faraday bag.
Yeah, that's important.
But it's not the end of the day either. Like if there is an EMP, I think this is where there's a lot of misguided idealism in what could really happen. If there's an EMP, or say the whole grid goes down, nothing's going to work for everybody, not just you.
Yep.
So I don't know that those documents are going to be that big a deal anyways.
Well, that was my next point, is if
Right.
you're in a close enough proximity to a nuclear explosion, you know exactly what will survive anyway, and what will, you know, the grid's not going to survive. It really, I think it really comes down to trying to be self-contained yourself, right? Just be worried about your own little world, those things that are important to you. Obviously, having some light, having a little bit of power for communications, and things like that. You know, some conveniences. You obviously won't need your televisions. Your radios would be nice. Certain things like that. That, you know, will you need to power your furnace in that situation? Probably not. You'll need to have other means of heating your home and cooling your home and such. And so I think your power needs, at least I've envisioned my power needs at that point being very minimal. Be able to charge batteries for flashlights, and, you know, flashlights for security at night. You can obviously limit your activity to within the home where you need very minimal light. So I think it's just focusing on being independent. And I think that's what most preppers want to be anyway, right? We want to be out on the homestead, disconnected from the grid. I mean, that's what I would like to be. And being off grid, as in not connected to the power grid itself, or having Wi-Fi or phone lines or anything like that, being that kind of disconnected. And if an event happens and you've already made that change, who's going to notice? I mean, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to practice, right? Rather than be so prepared that I'm wrapping my house. I've got my whole office here in a Faraday cage, like a spy would, right? You know, to keep out all the RF frequencies and radio waves and so forth from spying on him, but rather just not worry about it that much, honestly.
Yeah, keep your
have a few
keep your important, you know, your ham. There's a guys that in that book, the Going Home book, the guy had his whole ham radio set up. That's why he did a whole room with the chicken wire, because he had a station.
Well, that's true. If you got an HF radio, high frequency radio, yeah, that's really hard to take that apart and put it in a Faraday bag. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and not too cheap to make a duplicate either. I mean, that's expensive to have a whole duplicate set.
But how critical is that communication? I mean, I personally don't need an HF radio to talk to people on the other side of the world. I mean, if I'm disseminating information for my entire community, okay, yeah, that's probably pretty important, and I probably should consider something like that. Yeah, to have lightning arresters on my antennas and harden everything so it would survive.
I think that was mainly for the book and the story and the
that's true.
Make it cool. There's a cool character in there that's got his whole house is Faraday cage. You know, that's kind of a fun.
But I don't think you need to. I think just hardening everything and having disconnects. Go ahead,
well, that's the sexy sales part of prepping, right? Oh man, this guy's the best prepper. He's got a Faraday house. Like, whoa, right? The reality is we can't afford that.
Yeah.
Nor does it make sense for us to put all of our money into something like that. Like you were talking about earlier, Shane, it's like reduce your reliance on electricity and get used to it now, because then after an event, should an event happen, it's no big deal, right? Yep. If you prepare your mind for it, you're going to do better, even if you don't have prepared stuff for it. I like the idea. Like I grew up, my parents, I love them to death. They have a giant freezer. They've got multiple fridges, and the freezer sections are filled to the brim. And I'm like, what happens? For years, they're like, well, we're just hoping and praying that nothing will happen. And then finally they went and got battery backups. I'm like, okay, cool. Then what happens when those are gone? Well, then they went and got solar panels. I'm like, all right, now you're good. Right. I love the idea of less freezer space, more canned foods. More dry pack. And when I say canned foods, I'm talking personally canned. You can it yourself, jarred. That's the best kind of stuff, because you've got a year on it. And if you've got fuel set aside and other ways to warm your house, you don't need to heat your whole house in the winter. You just need to heat the places where you're going to be. Like back in the day, that's how they did it. It's like all the people, if you look at the old homes in England and all across the UK, everybody had shared rooms. It was 3 to 4 kids in one bedroom. Normal, unless you were like the Earl or a prince or something, right? Oftentimes, you'd have grandma and grandpa in there too. How awkward was that on your wedding night? And you're like, we're going back to our house and grandma's in the bed next to us. That's how it was. We're so blessed that we don't have to deal with that. But we need to be able to flip the switch and be like, okay, power's out everywhere. We need to change things up and get the body heat all in one room. Heat one room instead of the whole house. Cool one room instead of the whole house, right? Simplify and reduce our necessity for energy consumption for the luxurious life that we all currently live.
Yep. And I think that's the key, is that we have to realize that we really do live in have a very luxurious lifestyle. We have things that our ancestors never imagined we would have. I mean, like this monitor I'm staring at here. But and I think that the key for me, and of course I'm just trying to speak for myself, you know, is to learn to do those things now, learn to change my life now, so that I'm not looking back and turning into a pillar of salt, right? I don't have to, I'm not going to look back longingly at the days when I had power and those kind of comforts and missing that life, because right now I want to get out of this type of lifestyle, right? And I think that's the goal, is to obviously to live in Babylon, because we live here in Babylon, but not be part of it. And so, you know, how do we do that with all the power consumption we have right now? If you don't need it, don't get yourself addicted to it. Obviously, you know, we each have our jobs. We need to, do a lot of work online. I need to have that connection, unfortunately. But if it were possible, I would minimize everything I possibly can, any type of reliance on the grid, and have backup plans for water, for food, for, you know, rain catchment system. Because when water runs out, we're going to get more water. You know, when the tanks can't get filled up by the electric pumps. Yeah. So it can be fairly complex, but it can also just be very, very simple.
Well, it's funny because, like, you think of all these tech ways we can preserve our current lifestyle, and the simplicity is you don't need to do that. You can go a different route. Like, you can go down to the dollar store, Dollar General, Dollar Tree, whatever's around you, and go buy stacks and stacks and stacks of those tea candle lights. You can buy those tall glass candles. Those are like 4-hour candles, right? And like those saint candles and all those other candles, like some of those are 8-hour candles. You can get all kinds of candles and be fine, right? Stock up on those, get tons of them, and you're fine. You don't have to have power. And you can also realize when you have less light, you go to bed earlier. You go to bed earlier, you're going to be more rested for the next day. Hey, health improves. There's a lot of benefits to that.
Early to bed, early to rise.
Get back to our normal, circadian rhythm, right? You won't need an alarm clock. So, like, okay, now we don't get rid of the digital clocks. Get your analog clocks. Everyone's probably got digital thermometers for checking for fevers. Get some analog ones. Those are easy to read. Put it in your mouth. Make sure you keep the baby one separate from the adult one, because most likely you put the baby one in the baby's butt, right?
The rectal versus the oral?
The rectal versus the oral thermometers. Keep those separate, right? But it goes back to have a home store. Having a home store makes you resilient to most events and can cross over across so many different types of events. But those are like super, super simple things you can start doing to make yourself more resilient. Not for if, but for when. Because things go sideways all the time. And I had this cool list I was going off of that I created today, and I just lost it. There we go. But like, just simplifying, like, do I need as much energy? Do I need all my digital devices saved and stored? No. Is there likelihood of having an EMP? Huge. I think Shane's right. It's a lot smaller than we realize. But localized events, grid issues, yeah, they're a bigger deal. So having, if you want and you have space, some kind of backup power source, some solar panels and some generator, fuel generator systems and battery banks, yes, highly recommended. If you can't afford the solar ones, get a tri-fuel gas propane white fuel version. Like, there's other different ways you can do this.
And you can even go in with a neighbor, or if anybody you know is like a family member, and say, hey, look, because the likelihood, especially if they live relatively close, the likelihood of you guys consolidating down to one location when there's a long-term issue is pretty high. And why not have the resources available, and then you can just share those. And I think, there's right now, especially, there's a lot of people who are struggling financially. And so if, solar, you look at a solar generator a solar power bank with solar panels, it could be $4,000 or $5,000. That's a big chunk.
Yep.
So if you first and foremost get all your other stuff in place and then start saving up for that, because that's definitely something you're going to want to have. Those ones at Costco, I think I got a dual fuel at Costco for $700, $800. So that's a little bit better. And it gives you that opportunity to have something there available to you. The only problem with that is now you got to store a little more propane or store a little bit more gasoline to be able to run that generator, because the sun is always there. Well, most always there. It better be always there. And that could charge pretty good on your battery bank. But if you don't have that, renewable, sustainable, then you're going to have to look for fuel at some point. So, the other thing is, and if we want to talk about it or not, that's fine too. But like, that's if you're home when an EMP happens. But what if you're not home? What if you're out and about? Like, what are some things to prepare for and do that way, guys? What do you want? Do we want to talk about that? Or,
well, I think, kind of going back to what I said before is, you should have some warning with a nuclear strike. I think that obviously your warning would be very minimal, and you may not have time to get back home. But if it's a solar flare, yeah, you'd have plenty of time to say, hey, I'm not going out these days because this flare is expected and we don't know what it's going to do. But, as part of my preps there, I'm always prepared to walk home. Although in the back of my vehicle, I carry a folding bike. I always have a folding bike back there. So, although I would still be fairly confident that vehicles will operate, again, depending on your proximity to the event. But folding bike, I have a truck. I always go heavy wherever I go, especially if I'm going on a longer trip. I'll load up with extra, essentials. But just being physically fit, having the right footwear to walk home if you have to, and having your go bag and enough water and food to get yourself back home in a reasonable amount of time. And hopefully there'll be people to help along the way.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like, okay, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're going to be on a longer trip, definitely want to make sure you're more prepared because you're further away from the house. If you're at work, and it's a 10, 15-minute drive, and then you're probably going to take an hour or two to walk home. It's not going to be as important for you to have as many things in your car for that. But I think that's a good idea. One of the things that I started doing is actually, I think about it before I leave. I think about where I'm going and whether I should put on my Tevas or my actual tennis shoes. If I'm going to be just running some quick errands, sometimes it's easy to just throw on my sandals and go. But if I'm going to be a little further away, I want to probably have some shoes on because, unless your feet are accustomed to it, sandals are not as comfortable as shoes are hiking home for miles.
Yeah. And, I've talked about this before, is that I tried to do 50 miles walking, couldn't do it. I could not do it. After about 12, 13 hours, 28 miles or so, the arches of my feet froze up and I was done. So, and I always thought, I can do that. That's easy, well, air quotes.
It goes back to the training. You've got to keep it in a training cycle so that you stay capable of doing that. But then Paris, go back a few episodes ago, morning routine, right? Mastering your morning routine. Everyday carry. Are you going to carry shoes with you to change into if you have to when you're running around your Tevas? Or are you going to just say, okay, I'm just going to deal with the consequences? Because that's how I deal with the consequences. I love to be barefoot as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to live with the consequences of that. However, I also keep a pair of shoes under my bed, an extra pair of shoes in the car, and in the garage, I've got extra boots. Like, I've got things everywhere in case I need them. But the reality is, if I don't have it on me and I have to move quick, it's too late.
Yeah.
We all need to just be aware and cognizant of that. That's part of the ready radius, is like, what do I have on me to use in a crisis? And what will I need that I don't have on me?
Yeah. Bruce Willis, he should have really grabbed his shoes as he was running out the door, man. I tell you.
Right. Die Hard.
Yeah. I can't
Die
imagine.
Hard or With a Vengeance or like
Just the first Die Hard, yeah, the first.
But
Die
yeah,
Hard.
we all, everything is unexpected. If it wasn't expected disaster, it wouldn't be as disastrous. That's why prepping is so great, because you're preparing for these disasters to minimize the effectiveness of said disasters. Like we talked about the generator, we talked about the different things. If you're driving a lot and you're always away from home, have extra ways to get home, extra tools to help you get home. Have better shoes, hiking boots, have hiking poles.
Have a
poles
map.
that you're walking with, take 30 to 40% of the weight off of your feet over and allow you to go 2 to 3 times longer over a period of days. I use them to go up and down Mount Whitney, and I was like, why didn't I use these before? Wasn't my first 14er, but I'm telling you, completely changed my life. Other things to do, I would highly, highly stock up on, get your prescription meds, go to Jase Medical, right? JASE.com. Get them, use code PrepperTalk, save $10. Stock up on paper maps. I love paper maps, and I think that is one of the biggest things people forget. I think paper maps are as valuable as gold post digital world, because
nowadays nobody has them anymore. Yeah.
Right. How valuable are you going to be if you've got maps and people can come over to your house and with their paper that they've scrounged up from somewhere and a pen or pencil, they can draw out a makeshift map to help them get to where they need to go.
Yeah, the GPS is not going to work.
Right.
And that's the thing in the movies. They always talk about, they show that the freeways are piled with cars that are dead, and so that's something that we have as a belief. And Shane, you're kind of combating that a little bit by saying that you don't think that's going to be as big a deal as maybe the movies or the books kind of predict. But
if you think about if only a handful of cars are disabled on the freeway, it's going to shut down the freeway anyway, right? If
that's a good point. Yeah.
If a few cars are stopped and others can't get around, it's going to be a big mess anyway. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted your train of thought there.
No, I was just thinking that that's something that when we think about an EMP, that's what we think about, is planes falling out of the sky, cars abandoned on the freeway in roads, and just like in no power. And so that's one of the things I think that we need to remember, is that if you're going to have power backups, have a way to protect those power backups from an EMP that is not connected to the grid versus or a coronal mass ejection. Now, in my opinion, if it's a virus that hits the grid, then and your thing is not connected to the grid, I think you should be okay, right? Because let's say, for example,
other than everything works off of the grid, off of the the internet, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying my solar power bank is in my closet. It's not plugged into anything. It's nothing's happening. So if a virus hits the substation and shuts down the power or the computer system that's running the power, that's not going to harm. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, and you guys even, but that's not going to harm my power bank, because it's not even connected to anything. It's not plugged in. So it wouldn't even get to it. So I would have power because of that, in my opinion. So I feel like there's, of all the options, another guy, actually, there's a guy that I want to bring on because he's a scientist, and I asked him about EMPs, and he said basically the threat of EMPs from like a nuclear strike is not as big as we think it is. And he was going through this whole thing, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. So maybe I'll call him up and ask him to come on the show at some point. But
yeah, there's a lot of myths with nuclear in particular. The U.S. believes they can win the nuclear war. There won't necessarily be a nuclear winter if a whole bunch are set off. There's quite a few myths that way, but we just don't know and just won't really know, because obviously the thoughts for nuclear winter is that, everything will be clouded out, the atmosphere will be darkened, and then we won't be able to grow anything. That's not necessarily true, and most likely is not true.
And the fallout and everything else.
Yeah,
too.
the fallout, it's going to settle much more rapidly than previously thought, and I guess depending on the weapon, the fallout is going to be less severe. The new nuclear weapons, so a lot of them are created to create the EMP and little to no fallout. So there's a lot of things we just don't know about. We just don't know. It's definitely best to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But I think that the key is, for me in my mind, is the infrastructure, our infrastructure, the grid is what's most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can disconnect yourself from that, like you're saying, Paris, disconnect your home from the grid, flip that main breaker, is going to make a big difference, because that's where everything is going to be concentrated, in that big array, that big antenna. And then, of course, try to be like I said before, self-contained, to not be reliant on the grid. And I think that's where we're going to find individually our best success in surviving any kind of EMP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Start with a plan, stay disconnected as much as you can. I love that.
I think there's
have a good attitude. Like, honestly, have a good attitude about whatever could happen. There's a phrase that it is come what may and love it. And Joseph B. Wirthlin said that years ago. He's from our church. It's his mom's quote, and I don't know where she got it, but man, I tell you, that is the piece de resistance in mental clarity of, okay, something went wrong. Cool. Come what may and love it. Embrace the suck is another way to put it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And
be okay dealing with disasters. Like, we're all dealing with some kind of trauma in our lives at any given moment, and we can make it a mountain or leave it the molehill it is. If you've got little kids, the mountains they make out of every little truck. Oh, I can't hit the garage door button. You hit the garage door button before me, or I can't buckle in before you buckle in. Like, the most ridiculous arguments. Yeah. And they turn into meltdowns.
Sometimes we're just big little kids.
And but we need to be more resilient. And I think that's the number one thing we need to prep for EMP or anything else, is we as adults, we need to adult better.
That's great. Any last minute comments to wrap up, guys?
I was just going to say positive. I just had to say it again. Positive mental attitude. Just get it, adopt it, change who you are to get to where that is, and keep it. And I'll turn that time back to you, Paris. Sorry.
No, that's great. So guys, just think about what in your home do you want to have protected, and then go find on Amazon. We have an Amazon store. So if you click on our link and buy some stuff, maybe we'll see if we can throw up some ideas that we have, but find a good Faraday bag that will give you the protection for that item. Get as many of those as you can. Just build your stash as you can financially and afford to do that. The tip that Scott gave about having a hard drive where you're just uploading and backing up all your stuff and your important documents, great tip. And other than that, make sure you hit up our friends at survivalfrog.com and over at AMP3 to get your survival gear and your first aid kits. Remember to use the code PrepperTalk at any of our links, and you'll be able to save some money. So thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared. And we are excited to be your hosts. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you next week.
See ya.